The council chamber was silent except for the sound of elders' trembling hands against the smooth crystal table. Through the tall windows, she could see the fires burning in the eastern valleys. They had landed 3 days ago, and already half of surface was covered in their black ships. "We have no choice," said quietly. Her silver eyes reflected the dancing flames outside. "We must send the beacon." The other council members looked at each other with fear. The ancient beacon had been built by their ancestors thousands of years ago, meant to call for help from the stars. But no one had ever used it. No one knew if anyone would answer. "What if no one comes?" asked council member, his voice barely a whisper. He was young for the council, only 300 years old. His blue skin was pale with worry. "What if someone worse comes?" added another voice from across the table. Stood up slowly. Her long robes dragged across the floor as she walked to the window. Outside, she could see families running through the streets, children crying. The peaceful life her people had known for was ending. "Then we die either way," she said. "But if we do nothing, we die for certain. They do not stop. They do not negotiate. They consume everything." The vote was unanimous. They had to try. 2 hours later stood in the ancient temple beneath the capital city. The beacon sat in the center of the room, covered in dust and old symbols. Her hands shook as she pressed them against the activation panel. The machine hummed to life, sending a signal out into the dark void of space. A simple message, translated into every mathematical language known to science. "Help us, please. We are dying." Across the galaxy, the signal traveled faster than light, bouncing between relay stations that had stood silent for thousands of years. It passed through empty space, through asteroid fields, through the territories of species who had long ago stopped listening for such calls. Then it reached Earth. Captain was drinking his morning coffee when the alarm sounded on Deep Space Station. He nearly dropped his cup as red lights flashed across the control room. "Sir, we're picking up something strange," said Lieutenant Menu, his fingers flying across the holographic displays. "It's an old first contact protocol, very old. Someone's asking for help." Set his cup down and walked to the main screen. He was a tall man with short black hair and tired eyes. He had been in the space service for 20 years, but they had never encountered another intelligent species. Earth had been alone in the universe, until now. "Where's it coming from?" he asked. "Sector 774, about 15 light-years away. Sir, the message, it's desperate. They're under attack." Within hours, the message had reached Earth Command. Admiral Sang read the translation 3 times before he believed it. Another species, another civilization, and they were dying. The Human Coalition held an emergency meeting. Representatives from every nation argued for hours. Some said humanity was too young, too unprepared for contact with aliens. Others said this was exactly why humanity had built warships and trained soldiers to protect the innocent. In the end, the vote was close but clear. Humanity would answer the call. Admiral Sang chose to lead the mission. 3 warships were prepared: the Indomitable, the Resolute, and the Defiant. 200 soldiers, 50 pilots, and a diplomatic team led by Dr. Jin. Jin was nervous as she boarded the Indomitable. She had spent her whole career studying alien languages that might exist. Now she would meet real aliens, if they survived long enough to talk. "Do you think they'll like us?" she asked as the ship prepared to launch. The captain looked at her with a sad smile. "I think they're desperate. Desperate people don't have the luxury of being picky." The 3 ships left Earth orbit on a Tuesday morning. The journey through faster-than-light space took 3 days. During that time, the crew prepared. Soldiers checked their weapons. Pilots ran simulations. Jin studied what little information they had about the people. They were herbivores, peaceful. They had never fought a war in their recorded history. Their cities were built for beauty, not defense. They wrote poetry and studied the stars and believed the universe was fundamentally good. Then they came and proved them wrong. When the human fleet dropped out of FTL space near, the first thing they saw was the destruction. Orbital stations were broken and burning. Debris floated everywhere, and thousands of black ships swarmed around the planet like insects around a wound. "My God," whispered Minu from the bridge. His jaw tightened. "All ships' battle stations, prepare for combat." On the planet's surface, in what remained of the capital city, Elder received word that ships had arrived. Her heart lifted for the first moment in days. Someone had answered. Someone had come to help. Then her age showed her the sensor readings. The ships that had arrived were primitive by galactic standards. They used chemical rockets for maneuvering. Their weapons were based on explosions and kinetic force. They were crude, violent, built for one purpose only. "What kind of species still fights like this?" whispered, staring at the data. "What have we called here?" On the bridge of the Indomitable, Jin was trying to establish communication with the translation software was struggling, but slowly, words began to form. "They're asking who we are," she said too. The captain looked at the burning planet below, at the swarm of enemy ships, at his own hands which had held weapons since he was 18 years old. "Tell them," he said quietly, "that we're from Earth, and we're here to help." The message was transmitted. On read it and felt a chill run through her body. Earth. She had never heard of it, but looking at their ships, at their weapons, she suddenly understood something terrifying. They had asked the stars for salvation, and the stars had sent them monsters. The first meeting happened in orbit, on a neutral station that was barely functional. Elder brought 5 advisors. Captain brought Dr. Jin and 2 guards. The moment saw the humans, she understood why her people were frightened. They walked differently then. Their movements were controlled, efficient, predatory. Their eyes faced forward like hunters, not to the sides like prey. And they were tall, much taller than her people. But what scared her most was their calm. They were destroying her world, and these humans looked ready, like they had done this before. "Thank you for coming," said through the translation device. Her voice shook slightly. Jin smiled, trying to look friendly. She had studied alien psychology for years, but nothing prepared her for meeting a real alien. Was beautiful in a way that hurt to look at. Her silver skin seemed to glow, and her eyes were deep and sad. "We received your call," Jin said carefully. "We want to help. Can you tell us about your enemy?" For the next hour explained everything. The swarm had appeared without warning. They didn't communicate. They didn't negotiate. They simply consumed. World after world, species after species. They had tried everything, diplomatic signals, offers of resources, even surrender. Nothing worked. Listened in silence. When finished, he asked a simple question. "How many of your people are left?" 3 billion on the surface. Maybe 300 million in shelters underground. His voice broke. "We had 12 billion before they came." One of the guards behind made a soft sound of anger. The captain raised his hand slightly, and the guard went silent. "We'll help," you said, "but you need to understand something. The way we fight, it might frighten you." Looked at him carefully. "You mean your weapons? We've seen the scans of your ships. They're very direct." "That's a polite way to put it," Jin said with a sad smile. "Elder, humans come from a violent world. We had to become strong to survive. Our methods aren't elegant, but they work." "Are you predators?" asked one of his advisors suddenly. The question hung in the air like poison. Met his eyes. "Our ancestors were. We evolved from hunters, but we're more than that now." The advisor looked sick. "You eat meat?" "Yes." Several stood up quickly, backing away, held up her hand, stopping them. "We asked for help," she said firmly. "We have no right to judge who answered." But her hands were shaking. The meeting ended soon after. As the humans returned to their ship, Jin felt terrible. "They're afraid of us," she said too. "I know. We came to save them." "I know that too." The captain looked tired. But fear is honest. They see what we are. They're not wrong to be careful. Back on the Indomitable, Sergeant Wu was briefing his unit. He was a big man with scars on his arms and a gentle smile that didn't match his warrior's body. "Listen up," he said to his soldiers. "We're going down to the surface tomorrow to help evacuate civilians. These people have never seen combat, never held a weapon. They're pacifists, so I want everyone on their best behavior. No aggressive movements, no loud noises. Smile, be nice. Understand?" The soldiers nodded. They were trained for war, but they were also trained for mercy. The next day, Wu's unit landed in a city that was half destroyed. Refugees were huddled in what remained of a public building. When the human soldiers entered, children started crying. Adults pushed them behind their bodies. "It's okay," Wu said softly, holding his hands up to show they were empty. "We're here to help. We have transport ships. We can take you somewhere safe." But they wouldn't move. They stared at the humans like they were looking at demons, at the weapons on their belts, at the armor that could withstand explosions, at their forward-facing eyes. One young finally stepped forward. Her name was, and she was a scientist. Unlike the others, her fear was mixed with curiosity. "You're carbon-based?" she asked in broken standard. "Yes," Wu answered. "You breathe oxygen?" "Yes." "But your biology, the scans show you have redundant organs, multiple backup systems. Your bones are incredibly dense. Your pain tolerance is," she paused, searching for words, "impossible. How do you exist?" Wu smiled sadly. "Our world made us tough. We had to be." Stared at him. Then she did something that surprised everyone. She laughed. It was a bitter, tired laugh. "We spent thousands of years believing the universe was kind," she said. "We thought intelligence meant peace. We thought evolution would make species gentle." She looked at the destroyed city around them. "We were fools." "No," Wu said gently. "You were lucky. Your world was kind. You evolved in paradise. There's no shame in that." "And your world?" "Our world tried to kill us every day, so we learned to kill back." That night requested permission to study human biology. She couldn't believe what she found. Humans could survive injuries that would kill most species instantly. They could function with broken bones, torn muscles, even damaged organs. They healed fast. They adapted faster. "You're not just predators," she told Jin during an interview. "You're apex predators. You're designed to survive anything." Jin nodded slowly. "Our planet had larger predators than us, stronger, faster, with bigger teeth and claws, but we survived by being smarter, by being stubborn, by refusing to give up." "Are you proud of that?" asked. Jin thought for a long moment. "Sometimes. And sometimes I wish we came from a world like yours, a peaceful place. But we can't change what we are. We can only choose what we do with it." On the command deck was planning strategy with. They would launch another major attack soon. The humans had to be ready. "We'll need to engage them in orbit," explained. "Draw them away from the planet." "Your ships are outnumbered 20-1, said. "We know. You'll die." Looked at her with eyes that had seen too much war. "Maybe, but we'll take as many of them with us as we can." Felt cold. These humans talked about death like it was just another part of the plan, like sacrifice was normal. "Why?" she asked quietly. "Why would you die for us? You don't know us. We're not your people." "Because you asked for help," said simply, "and because it's the right thing to do." That night, as tried to sleep, she kept thinking about the humans. They were violent and frightening and completely alien to everything her people believed. But they were also kind, also brave, also willing to die for strangers. She had asked the stars for salvation, and the stars had sent her something she never expected. Not monsters, not angels, just people. Dangerous, complicated, impossible people who chose to be heroes. The next morning, they launched their attack, and watched as the humans prepared to show her world what Earth meant by the word war. They came in waves, their black ships blotting out the stars. On the observation station, watched the human fleet position themselves between the enemy and the planet. 3 small ships against a swarm of thousands. "They're going to die," whispered beside her. "This is suicide." But then Captain's voice came through the communication channel, calm and cold. "All ships, weapons free. Show them why Earth doesn't have apex predators anymore." The Indomitable fired first. Not the elegant energy beams they expected, but crude explosive missiles that tore through space. They hit a ship and it simply exploded into pieces. No shields, no graceful destruction, just raw, violent force. "They're using chemical explosives," said in shock, watching from the science station. "In space, that's barbaric." "That's effective," corrected, watching more ships die. The human ships moved like nothing they had seen before. They didn't stay at safe distances. They drove straight into the enemy formation, firing at point-blank range. Hurled chunks of metal at impossible speeds. Nuclear-tipped missiles detonated in bright flashes. And when one human ship's weapons overheated, the pilot simply rammed it into a cruiser. Both ships exploded. The pilot ejected at the last second, screaming defiance over the open channel. Felt sick. This wasn't battle. This was chaos, madness. The humans fought like they were already dead and just wanted to take as many enemies as possible with them. But it was working. "Sergeant Wu's unit is boarding a hive ship," reported the communications officer. "They're requesting we monitor their helmet cameras." Almost said no, but she had to understand. She had to see what kind of species humanity really was. The footage appeared on the main screen. Wu and 20 soldiers cut through the ship's hull with plasma torches. The inside was dark, organic, wet. Warriors waited for them, each one 3 meters tall with razor claws and armored carapaces. The humans didn't hesitate. They poured into the ship like a flood. What happened next would give nightmares for years. The humans fought with a brutal efficiency that was almost beautiful in its horror. They used explosives in enclosed spaces. They shot at ranges where the aliens could almost touch them. They didn't retreat when wounded. They kept fighting until they physically couldn't move. One soldier lost his arm to a claw. He switched his gun to his other hand and kept shooting. Another was stabbed through the stomach. She pulled the claw out herself and threw a grenade into his face. "They're insane," whispered. "They're all insane." But was watching something else. The way Wu's unit moved together, how they covered each other. How when one fell, 2 others immediately pulled them to safety. They weren't just warriors, they were a family. "Watch," she said, pointing at the screen. "They're not fighting for themselves, they're fighting for each other." The boarding action took 40 minutes. When it ended, the hive ship was dead, and Wu's unit had suffered 60% casualties, but they had won. In orbit, the battle continued. Lieutenant Wu was a pilot on the Resolute. She flew her fighter with a grace that seemed impossible for such a violent craft. Her movements were art. Her weapon's fire was poetry. When a formation broke through the line and headed for a transport full of refugees, Wu didn't hesitate. She redirected all power from her shields to her engines and threw her fighter directly into their path. "This is Delta 7, she said calmly over the radio. "I'm going to need a new ship after this." She fired everything she had. Missiles, rounds, even the emergency flares. The ships tried to return fire, but she was too fast, too unpredictable. She led them away from the transport, deeper into human weapon range. Then her fighter took a direct hit. The cockpit began to decompress. "Delta 7, eject," ordered. "Not yet, Captain. Still have 3 enemy ships on my tail." "That's an order, Lieutenant." "Yes, sir. Will comply. Right after she jerked her controls hard, putting her dying fighter on a collision course with the lead ship. At the last second, she ejected. Her fighter crashed into the enemy vessel and both exploded. She was rescued 20 minutes later, laughing and crying at the same time. On the observation station, watched it all with growing horror and something else. Something she was ashamed to name. It was awe. They don't fight to survive, she said quietly. They fight to win, no matter the cost. Nodded. I've been studying their history. They've been at war with themselves for thousands of years. War is normal for them. They understand it the way we understand mathematics. Does that make them evil? Asked. Thought about Wu sacrificing her ship to save refugees. About Wu's soldiers pulling their wounded to safety. About positioning his flagship between the planet and the enemy, using his own ship as a shield. No, she said finally, it makes them dangerous. There's a difference. The battle raged for 6 hours. When it ended, they had lost half their fleet. The humans had lost one ship, the Defiant, and 40% of their fighters. But the planet was safe, for now. That night visited the human medical bay. She wanted to see the wounded, to understand how they could keep fighting with such terrible injuries. What she found confused her more than anything else. The soldiers weren't crying or complaining. They were laughing, telling jokes. The man who had lost his arm was arguing with a medic about getting a cool robot replacement. The woman who had been stabbed was asking when she could return to duty. Don't you feel pain? Asked Wu, who was being treated for a broken rib. Of course, he said, wincing as the medic worked. It hurts like hell, but pain is just information. It tells you you're damaged, doesn't mean you have to stop. That's impossible. Wu smiled, that's human. Later met with Jin in a quiet observation room. Through the window, they could see, damaged but still alive. I don't understand your people, admitted. You're capable of such violence, such cruelty, but also such sacrifice, such compassion. How can you be both? Jin looked tired. Because we had to be. Our world made us strong enough to kill, but we chose to be strong enough to protect. That's the difference between a monster and a guardian. It's not about what you can do, it's about what you choose to do. And what do you choose? To help always. Jin smiled sadly, even when it scares the people we're helping. Was silent for a long time. Then she said something that surprised herself. I'm glad you came. I'm still frightened of you, but I'm glad you came. So are we, Jin said. We've been alone in the universe for so long. It's good to know we're not the only ones trying to survive. On the bridge of the Indomitable, was reading casualty reports when the alert sounded. His blood went cold. Sir, Minu said, his voice shaking. New contact, it's big, really big. On the main screen, a ship appeared that dwarfed everything else in the system. It was easily 10 times the size of the largest vessel. Its hull was covered in organic armor and weapon ports that glowed with green fire. What is that? Asked. His voice came through the channel, terrified. That's a dreadnought. They only send those when they're serious. Captain, that ship carries their Queen Empress. Looked at his crew, at the damaged ships, at the wounded soldiers. They had already given everything. And now they had to give more. All personnel, he said calmly. Battle stations. Let's show them what happens when you threaten our friends. The dreadnought moved through space like a living mountain. Its weapons charged with a sound that could be felt across all frequencies. The Queen Empress was not here to conquer. She was here to punish. On the Indomitable, Captain studied the enemy ship with cold calculation. His vessel was damaged. His crew was exhausted. By every logical measure, they should retreat. Captain, Minu said quietly, we can't win this fight. I know. We should evacuate thee and fall back to Earth. And leave them to die later, shook his head. No, we end this here today. He opened a channel to Admiral Sangbak on Earth. The old admiral appeared on the screen, looking grave. I'm watching your situation, Sang said. It doesn't look good. No, sir. Permission to use Protocol Omega. The channel went silent. Protocol Omega was humanity's darkest secret. Weapons they had built during the worst wars on Earth. Weapons they swore never to use again. things that frightened even the people who created them. You understand what you're asking, Sang said finally. Yes, sir. And then they'll know what we're capable of. They'll never trust us again. Looked at the planet below, where 3 billion innocent people waited to die. Better they fear us and live than trust us and die. Sang closed his eyes, then he nodded. Authorization granted. May God forgive us. The dreadnought launched its first attack. Bioships poured from its bays like a swarm of locusts. But these weren't normal fighters. These adapted. They learned. After the first wave took damage from missiles, the second wave had thicker armor. When proved effective, the third wave's shields adjusted. They're evolving mid-battle, reported from the observation station. Each generation learns from the last. That's impossible. That's cheating, interrupted Engineer Yang from the Resolute. He was a short, stocky man with grease on his hands and genius in his eyes. Captain, I have an idea. It's crazy. I'm listening. We can't out-evolve them, but we can be unpredictable, random. If we do things that don't make tactical sense, they can't adapt. Explain. We overload the Resolute's reactor, set it to critical. Then we ram it straight into the Dreadnought's core. They'll never expect it because it's suicide, it's wasteful, it's insane, it's perfectly human. Everyone on the bridge looked at Yang like he'd lost his mind. He probably had. How long do we have before the reactor goes critical? Asked. 6 minutes after I start the overload. Enough time to evacuate the crew. If we're fast. Thought for exactly 3 seconds. Do it. The Resolute changed course, accelerating toward the Dreadnought. Its reactor began to whine, building to impossible pressures. The crew evacuated in emergency pods, shooting away from the ship like seeds from a flower. They saw the ship coming but didn't understand. Why would they sacrifice a capital ship for a suicide attack? It was inefficient, illogical. They tried to intercept it, but the Indomitable and the remaining fighters covered its approach, throwing themselves into harm's way with reckless abandon. Lieutenant Wu, flying a new fighter, destroyed 4 bioships in 30 seconds. She took 3 direct hits but kept flying, her ship held together by sheer stubbornness and emergency patches. Come on, she whispered to her fighter. Just a little longer, just stay together a little longer. The Resolute hit the Dreadnought's shields at full speed. The reactor detonated 1 second later. The explosion was so bright that sensors went blind for a moment. When they cleared, the Dreadnought's entire forward section was gone, venting atmosphere and bodies into space. But it wasn't dead. We barely scratched it, Minyu said in despair. His face was stone. Then we used Protocol Omega, opened the armory. Deep in the Indomitable's cargo bay, sealed containers began to open. Inside were things that made even the human soldiers nervous. Weaponized diseases designed to target specific genetic markers. Kinetic impactors that could crack planetary crusts. Swarm AI that could convert matter into more copies of themselves. Weapons that civilized species had banned since the dawn of space travel. On the observation station, watched the readouts with growing horror. What are they doing? Those weapons are. They're war crimes. They're illegal. They're desperate, said quietly, and they're willing to become monsters to protect us. Wu's unit, battered but alive, was preparing to board the Dreadnought. This time, they weren't alone. 30 volunteers had joined them. Young people who had watched their families die, who had learned that peace required guardians, and sometimes guardians needed to have teeth. You sure about this? Wu asked the young named. He was barely an adult by his species standards, but his silver eyes were hard with purpose. You came from across the galaxy to save us, said. The least we can do is fight beside you. Wu clapped him on the shoulder. Welcome to the infantry, kid. Try not to die. The boarding action was brutal. The Dreadnought's interior was a nightmare of organic corridors and warriors. But this time, they saw something they'd never seen before. They saw humans fight with purpose. Every explosive was placed with care. Every shot was calculated. The humans weren't killing because they enjoyed it. They were killing because they had to, because behind them were people who couldn't protect themselves. Watched Wu take a claw to the chest and keep fighting. Watched him pull another soldier from danger. Watched him sacrifice his own safety for others. "Is this what you are?" asked, applying pressure to Wu's wound. "Warriors who protect." "No," Wu gasped. "We're gardeners, teachers, artists, parents. We're everything else first. Warriors only when we have to be." They fought their way to the Dreadnought's neural center, where the Queen Empress waited. She was massive, intelligent, and absolutely terrifying. When she spoke, it was in a voice that bypassed ears and spoke directly to minds. "Humans," she hissed, "new prey, weak, soft, you will be consumed." Jin's voice came through Wu's helmet. She had been studying biology with, "Sergeant, the Queen is the swarm. Kill her and they all fall." "Easy," Wu muttered, staring at the creature that was easily 5 meters tall and armored like a tank. "Just got to kill the impossible monster." He looked at his team, at the who had chosen to fight, at the woman beside him who was missing half her arm but still held a gun, at the man who could barely walk but refused to fall back. "For Earth," he said. "For added. For everyone we couldn't save," finished the wounded woman. They attacked together. It should have been a slaughter. The Queen was faster, stronger, deadlier. But the humans had something she didn't understand. They had each other. When one fell, another took their place. When ammunition ran out, they used explosives. When explosives were gone, they used their hands. The Queen Empress finally understood what she was facing. Not soldiers, not warriors, survivors. People who had clawed their way to the top of their food chain through sheer stubborn refusal to die. She killed 5 of them before she fell. But fall she did, with Wu's combat knife buried in her neural core. The moment she died, every in the system went silent. The bioship stopped moving. The dreadnought powered down. The swarm, linked to their queen's mind, simply ceased to function. In orbit, Wu watched her targets go dark. Did we win? On the Indomitable, let out a breath he'd been holding for hours. "Yes, Lieutenant, we won." But as the human fleet regrouped, as the casualties were counted, as the wounded were treated, called an emergency session of the High Council. "We need to decide," she said to the assembled leaders. "Earth saved us, but they also showed us what they are. They used weapons that are illegal across the galaxy. They fight with a brutality that terrifies us. They are capable of incredible violence." "Are they friends?" asked, "or are they the galaxy's next great threat?" The question hung in the air, unanswered. Outside the windows, human ships floated in the darkness, waiting. The war was over, but the silence that followed was heavy with questions. 3 billion were alive because of humanity, but 30% of the human forces were not. The dead floated in space, preserved by the cold void, waiting to be recovered and returned to Earth. Captain stood in the Indomitable's cargo bay, which had been converted into a temporary morgue. Row after row of sealed containers. Each one held someone who would never see home again. He read each name, memorizing them. It was the least he could do. "Captain," Minyu said softly from the doorway, "the council has requested a formal meeting. They're calling it a tribunal." Nodded slowly. He had expected this. "Tell them we'll attend." The tribunal was held in what remained of Capitol building. The High Council sat on one side, their faces unreadable. Jin and Admiral Sang, who had traveled from Earth, sat on the other. Between them, holographic displays showed footage from the battle. Elder stood to speak first. Her voice was steady but sad. "The people are grateful," she began. "You saved us from extinction. 3 billion lives continue because of your intervention, but gratitude is not the only consideration here today." She activated a display. It showed Wu's boarding action. The brutal close-quarters combat, the explosions in confined spaces, soldiers fighting with injuries that should have killed them. "This is how you fight," said, "with a violence we find difficult to comprehend. You brought weapons that are banned across the known galaxy. You use tactics that civilized species abandoned ago. You sacrifice your own people with barely a hesitation." Another display appeared, the Resolute ramming the Dreadnought, the suicide run that crippled the enemy flagship. You destroyed an entire capital ship, billions of resources, decades of construction. You did it without a second thought. Looked at, "What kind of species does this?" "A desperate one," answered quietly. "You were dying, we did what was necessary." "Necessary?" repeated. He stood up, his hands shaking. "You call war crimes necessary? Those weapons you used, the biological agents, the self-replicating machines, they're illegal for a reason. They don't just kill soldiers, they kill everything. They destroy worlds." "We didn't use them," Admiral Sang said firmly. "We prepared to use them. There's a difference." "Is there?" demanded. "You brought them, you were ready. What happens next time? What happens when humanity decides another species is a threat? Will you do the same to them?" The chamber fell silent. It was the question everyone was thinking but afraid to ask. Were humans saviors or monsters? And was there really a difference? Then stood up. The young scientist had been quiet until now, sitting with the other observers. But she walked to the center of the chamber and activated her own display. "I want to show you something," she said. "This is from Sergeant Wu's helmet camera." The footage played. It showed the moment when Wu took a claw to the chest. He could have retreated, should have retreated. Instead, he turned and pulled another soldier, unnamed, out of the path of a second attack. He took a blow meant for someone else. He saves life at the cost of his own safety. "Here's another clip," said. The display showed Lieutenant Wu redirecting her fighter to intercept the ships targeting the refugee transport. She was sacrificing her shields, her safety, possibly her life, to protect people she'd never met. And another. This time it was a human medic, working on a wounded civilian while warriors approached. The medic could have run. Instead, she stayed, shielding the civilian with her own body until help arrived. Turned to face the council. Yes, humans are violent. Yes, they have terrible weapons. Yes, they fight with a brutality that frightens us. But look at what they chose. Every single time they had a choice, they chose to protect us. They chose to die for us. They chose to sacrifice themselves for strangers. They're still dangerous, argued. Of course they are, agreed. That's the point. They're dangerous enough to defeat dangerous enough to protect us. But they're also kind enough to choose who they aim that danger at. Jin stood up, her voice gentle but firm. "You asked the stars for salvation, Elder, and we answered. Yes, we're violent. Our world made us that way. We evolved fighting for every scrap of food, every safe place to sleep. We built weapons because we had to. We learned to kill because the alternative was dying." She walked to the center of the room, standing beside. "But we also learned to love, to protect, to sacrifice. Every human in this fleet volunteered to come here. They knew they might die. They came anyway, not for glory, not for resources, because you asked for help and we couldn't say no." "Judge us if you want," Admiral Sang added, his old voice carrying weight. "Judge us by our capacity for violence, but also judge us by our capacity for compassion. Judge us by what we chose to do with our power. We could have ignored your signal. We could have stayed safe on Earth. We didn't. We came. We bled. We died. For you." The council chamber was silent for a long time, looked at the footage, at the humans fighting and dying, at their terrible weapons and their terrible kindness, at the contradiction they represented. Finally, she spoke. "The council will vote. Should humanity be granted membership in the galactic community, or should they be quarantined as too dangerous?" The vote took hours. Arguments were made on both sides. Some wanted humans welcomed as heroes. Others wanted them isolated as threats. The council was divided. In the end, cast the deciding vote. We grant humanity probationary membership, she announced. You may join our community. You may trade with us, learn from us, share the stars with us, but you will be watched closely. If you prove to be a threat, if you use your violence against the innocent, we will act. She looked directly at, we are grateful, and we are wary, I hope you understand. Nodded, we do, and will prove ourselves worthy of your trust. In the days that followed, the human fleet prepared to return to Earth, but not all of them were leaving. Sergeant Wu, recovered from his injuries, requested permission to stay on. Why? Asked him. Because they need teachers, Wu said simply. They've never fought before, never had to defend themselves. Next time a threat comes, we won't be here. They need to learn, and I'm a good teacher. You're a warrior. I'm a person who knows how to survive. That's what they need to learn. 36 other humans volunteered to stay as well. Engineers, medics, soldiers, diplomats. They would help rebuild what the war had destroyed. They would bridge the gap between humanity and the. On his last night on, met with at a memorial site. The head built it to honor all who died in the war, both and human. Names were carved into crystal, thousands of them, glowing softly in the darkness. I'm sorry we frightened you, said. I'm sorry we judged you, replied. You saved us, we should have just said thank you. You had every right to be afraid. We are dangerous. Smiled sadly. So are we now. You taught us that survival sometimes requires teeth. We'll never be the same people we were before the came. I don't know if that's good or bad. It's both, said. That's what growing up is. Losing innocence, gaining strength. It hurts, but it keeps you alive. The next morning, the human fleet departed. As they entered FTL space, broadcast a message to the entire galactic community. It was simple, direct, and would change the galaxy forever. This is Elder of the People. We were attacked by the swarm. We should have died. We didn't because a species called humanity answered our call. They are predators. They are violent. They carry weapons that terrify us. But they're also brave, compassionate, and willing to die for strangers. If you threaten the innocent, if you prey on the weak, if you think the galaxy is yours to conquer, remember this. Earth's monsters have entered the stars, and they protect their friends. The message spread across hundreds of worlds. Species that had never heard of humans suddenly knew their name. Some were intrigued, wanting to meet these strange warriors. Some were afraid, already planning for the day humanity might become a threat. And somewhere in the darkness, in the territory of a hostile empire that had conquered 17 species, a warlord listened to the message and laughed. Humans, he said to his advisors, primitive warriors, they'll make excellent slaves. His advisors agreed. They began planning an invasion. They made battle strategies. They calculated the resources Earth would provide once conquered. They made one critical mistake. They assumed humanity's compassion was weakness. They assumed warriors who protected others would hesitate to destroy their enemies. They would learn the truth eventually, that humans were gentle with their friends and absolutely merciless with their enemies, that compassion and brutality could exist in the same heart, that the species who chose to be heroes could also choose to be something much, much worse. But that was a lesson for another day. For now, the human fleet returned to Earth, carrying their dead and their stories. Admiral Sang addressed the planet, telling them what had been done in humanity's name. We went to the stars and found we weren't alone, he said. We found people who needed us, and we did what humans do. We helped, we fought, we sacrificed. Some of us didn't come home, but because of them, 3 billion innocent people are alive. He paused, looking directly into the camera. The galaxy knows we exist now. They know what we're capable of. Some will fear us. Some will hate us. But they'll also know this. Humanity keeps its promises. We protect our friends. And we don't start fights. But we always finish them. Back on, Wu began his first class teaching young basic defensive tactics. Attended, along with and dozens of others who had learned that peace required strength. Today we learned something simple, Wu said. How to stand your ground, how to protect the person next to you, how to be strong for those who can't be strong themselves. Will we become like humans? Asked, Violent. Wu shook his head. Violence is a tool. You can use it to destroy or to protect. The choice is yours. But know this, being able to fight and choosing not to is very different from being unable to fight at all. The first is peace. The second is just helplessness. And which one are humans? Asked. Wu smiled. We're people who chose peace, but we kept our teeth just in case. The lesson began, and across the galaxy, the story of Earth spread like fire.